start at the wide receiver position, where Alec Pierce is staying with the Indianapolis Colts. He lands a 4-year contract, $114 million to stay in Indianapolis, $84 million in guaranteed, $60 million at signing. Big deal for the Colts to keep Alec Pierce. We'll talk about the subsequent move, trading Michael Pittman to the Pittsburgh Steelers after this. But Boone, I'm kind of surprised. I thought there was a pretty good chance that if he got to the open market, he would bolt and he would go elsewhere. But Pierce staying in Indianapolis, what's your reaction to this big move?
I mean, all the moves all together with Pittman leaving, it definitely is a positive for him and a positive for a couple other guys on the roster too, right? Josh Downs, who we'll talk a bit about here, I'm sure. We both really like him. This potentially opens up things for him. Ty Warren at tight end, a guy who was crushing it last year before he got hurt later in the season. Now, again, he's another guy who's going to have more opportunity in this offense with Pittman gone. So the fact that they're willing to invest in him like this and Pierce, that's great. I still have my doubts, though, Harmon. Like, I don't know. Is he a true number one receiver? They definitely think so based on the way they're paying him and the effort that they went to try to keep him there. But this is a guy that went over 1,000 yards last year, did it on 47 catches. And he's always going to be, to an extent, that type of player. And I think we can look at it and say, okay, with Pittman gone, maybe the efficiency goes down a little bit. He's not going to be quite as efficient as last year, but he's going to get that uptick in targets. So fantasy-wise, kind of keeps him in the same range. But I feel like I'm approaching him with a bit of caution here. I still see him as like a wide receiver 3, bit of a boomer bust guy, but the guy that does have a really big weekly ceiling.
Yeah, that big weekly ceiling is still 100% going to be present here. And I think you could talk a lot about this move from just an NFL perspective. I mean, he now, from an average salary standpoint, is between he's between Brandon Ayuk and Terry McLaurin, but obviously Ayuk is going to be off the 49ers roster literally any minute now. So we'll say he's between Amon-Ra St. Brown and Terry McLaurin. Do I think Alec Pierce is in that tier of wide receiver? I don't think so. I think there's some parts of his game that's analogous with Terry McLaurin, but I think McLaurin's probably more of a full field player. But that's just like, the salary is what it is. You know, when you get to the open market, you're going to push for higher than you're theoretically worth. That's going to come up with almost all of these pass catchers here when we get to it. Frankly, even some of the other positional players as well, but that just is what it is. I think for, Pierce's standpoint, like, I know there's like a temptation to, man, he could have been Drake May's, number one wide receiver. He could have been on the other end of those very impressive Drake May vertical passes. The grass is not always greener. I think it's good for Pierce, if you're invested in him, to stay with the coaching staff and the system and where he's already had some success, especially because he's a specific archetype of receiver. But and to that point, Boone, remember when we were talking about Cortland Sutton during the year and Troy Franklin, out targeting him at times. And my point was the narrative is Troy Franklin has become the number one receiver in Denver. It's like, he's not the number one receiver in Denver. Conceptually, Cortland Sutton is still set up to be the number one player there. But when you got a quarterback playing in chaos, the vertical X receiver who's almost always running perimeter routes, which is what Sutton is, and it is what Pierce will remain. I don't think his role is going to change very much, even with Pittman out the door. He's probably still going to stay in that role. That guy is just susceptible to chaos and volatility. And I think that will still be the case for Pierce because, they kept Daniel Jones around, have the Indianapolis Colts. And I just think that we've seen more chaos from Jones than steady play. So I don't know that I'm just going to copy paste what happened in the first 8 weeks of the season for the Colts through a full game through a full season. That seems a little foolish to me. So I think we're probably going to land on the same place from a ranking standpoint with Alec Pierce. Good for him to stay here, but I wouldn't then this idea that he's now going to get 8 to 10 targets a game. I'm not sure that from an archetype standpoint, he can really be that guy.
I do want to say, though, he's definitely improved over the last couple of years. I feel like often I'm
100%.
throwing a bit of cold water on him because the type of receiver that he is. But last year, top 25 fantasy wideout over the final 11 weeks. I still think he's going to be a valuable piece in fantasy. And we talk about it all the time. You don't need your receivers to go out there and be the most consistent guys. If they do have that big ceiling, that's great. And having him in your roster, as long as he's going to come ADP-wise as a wide receiver 3 with those boom weeks, that's fantastic. I do think it's very interesting for Josh Downs, though. And one of the things we have to see is, who are they going to get to be that number 3 receiver in the offense now? Or are they going to give Downs a chance to potentially earn more of a role, play a little more outside? I think we both agree that he has that skill set. He could potentially do it, and yet they haven't really given him that opportunity. So fingers crossed that they do finally give him that shot. And I don't know who else is out there that they could potentially bring in to be the number 3 guy. Maybe they'll look to the draft. But right now, I think Downs is in a position where he could be a pretty sneaky fantasy ad, though we've been saying that for a couple of years now.
Right. And Downs' best moments from a, I think, real life standpoint, a fantasy standpoint, was in his second season when Michael Pittman, who we're going to talk about in just a moment, was dealing with a back injury for most of that year. That's when like his targets per route really spiked up, his efficiency spiked up. I think that Downs can benefit in that way, but don't want to go too far yet to say like, oh, it's Josh Downs' season, because what I would guess happens here is that the Colts probably spend another day 2 draft pick at the wide receiver position, because obviously Pittman's out. They bailed on A.D. Mitchell midway through last year, but that's typically how they've addressed this room. They've wanted to draft and develop. And by the way, like, it's worked. Like, all of these guys have been, obviously the A.D. Mitchell thing didn't really work out for various reasons, but for the most part, like, drafting and developing Pierce worked. Drafting and developing Michael Pittman, Josh Downs, like, that all worked. And I've always been kind of higher than consensus on all of these guys. And now I think it is probably Downs and Pierce going forward as the top 2 guys, but who they add in the draft, I think will decide like whether Downs is probably more of just like a bye-week filler type player in fantasy, or whether he can truly have that breakout season. Because yeah, you're right. I totally agree. From a talent standpoint, he can absolutely be that guy.
And I know we have a lot of guys to talk about today, so we can't just, stay on this one player and this one team, but still I want to bring up and I want to, hammer the point home. Tyler Warren at tight end. This makes him a lot more interesting. Last year, tight end 6 in fantasy points per game through the first 10 weeks. I think he could be a guy. He has that top 5 upside. We're always looking for guys that could get more opportunity. What if it's not Downs? What if it is Warren who becomes that like de facto number 2 pass catcher in the offense? That could put him in a position where he's having, a meaningful impact on fantasy like he was at the beginning of last year.
Shoot, he could lead this team in targets. I think with Pierce, if he remains kind of in that volatile X receiver bucket, he could be a guy that gets like 100 to 110 type of targets, and then maybe Warren is. I'm just doing fake math off the top of my head, but like he could be 120 type guy, and Downs could again like kind of live in that role. But it does depend on who they add. But I think the reason that they were able to move off of Michael Pittman, and we can transition to that one here, is because they have a lot of faith in Tyler Warren. I think they have a lot of faith in Josh Downs taking that step forward. And by the way, like all of these Colts bets might end up being wrong here. I don't want to like just say that they're absolutely on the right path, because I'm still pretty skeptical about what the quarterback plan is going forward. Yes. But on Pittman, this is kind of something we've been talking about on the show for a couple of months now, that there was a pretty good chance they were going to choose essentially Alec Pierce over Michael Pittman. That is what they have done here, as they send the 29-year-old Michael Pittman to the Pittsburgh Steelers, basically a late draft pick swap, essentially to get rid of Michael Pittman's salary, send him to Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh immediately signs him to a 3-year deal worth $59 million, just under $20 million average per year salary. I love this move for Pittsburgh, Boone, mostly because I think they get a credible starting outside receiver. The narrative was always, oh, Pittsburgh, just every single wide receiver draft pick they make, it always works out. It hasn't been working out lately, or because they were able to get these guys at values, they've had to send them away because the character issues or whatever, it wasn't a fit anymore. So they get Michael Pittman in here after trading DK Metcalf. I think there's a chance Michael Pittman could outproduce DK Metcalf in fantasy this year, because I was charting Michael Pittman for reception perception last night, and it just dawned on me, and I know that, like, listen, it brings me no pleasure to report this. I think he might be a perfect Aaron Rodgers receiver at this point in his career. We can kind of unpack that, but my first reaction here was I really like Pittman going to Pittsburgh. He fits with the type of receiver they need across from DK Metcalf. So reaction from you on Michael Pittman going to Pittsburgh?
This one might have the biggest disparity between like real life and fantasy, because I agree with you. Real life for Pittsburgh, absolute slam dunk. They finally solved that number 2 receiver position, which last year was like Calvin Austin and Roman Will. They just couldn't get it right. Now they get a guy that they can absolutely trust. And yet from a fantasy perspective, isn't this just kind of bad news all around? Like, yeah, maybe he will outproduce Metcalf, but what are we going to see from these guys? Like, we're looking at them now as like last year, Metcalf was like a wide receiver 3 for fantasy, and he didn't have any competition. Now you bring in Pittman, who his best years have been as like a volume guy, so he definitely can command targets. But man, I don't know. This does not seem exciting for fantasy, and it makes me want to stay away from both these guys now. I just don't think it's going to happen, barring some sort of injury. I think it's going to be pretty rough from a fantasy perspective, regardless who the quarterback is. If they bring back Rodgers, like, it's going to be, I don't know, it's going to be bad. I think very frustrating for fantasy. And anyone who sees those names, household guys, like, okay, yes, absolutely got them in my lineup, got them at a value in my draft. You're not going to enjoy having them in your lineup week to week, though.
Oh, let me be super clear here when I say that. Again, I'm just throwing numbers out randomly. I have no idea where you're going to rank these guys. I'm going to rank these guys where people are going to draft these guys. But let's just say, like, because of name brand value and, whatever, DK Metcalf goes off the board as wide receiver 30 or something like that. And Michael Pittman ends up as wide receiver 42. Let's just throw random numbers out here. I could see a scenario where Michael Pittman finishes as wide receiver 33 and DK Metcalf finishes as wide receiver 35. So if anything, it means like probably don't draft DK Metcalf, but I'm not saying like, oh boy, bump Michael Pittman up your rankings. But I just think that if I'm thinking about an Aaron Rodgers offense at this point, with Mike McCarthy in the mix here now as well, we should it's going to look different than what it did last year from a schematic standpoint, from a personnel package standpoint. Like what Rodgers wants is he wants guys that can separate quickly so he can get the ball out, and he wants these guys that are going to be in the short to intermediate area and be where you're supposed to be against zone coverage. Like, that just has never really been DK Metcalf's game, even if they had a couple of moments last year. But that is Michael Pittman's game. My one worry with Pittman as an individual player, I think he kind of slowed down as the year went on. So that's something that, like, maybe it's a big September for Michael Pittman. I could totally see that. Like, just 29-year-old receiver. He's kind of taken a lot of pounding because he does get a lot of those layup targets. But I like the move for Pittsburgh. I'm with you from a fantasy standpoint. I'm not getting all jacked up about anything that's happening in Pittsburgh, especially if Aaron Rodgers is the quarterback here. Let's go to the next wide receiver signing, and let's talk about Wan'Dale Robinson. Boone, Wan'Dale Robinson signs with the Tennessee Titans. 4 years, $78 million, $38 million guaranteed for Wan'Dale Robinson to reunite with Brian Daboll. This is the one that, like, everybody saw coming. And here we go. It happened. Wan'Dale Robinson signs with Tennessee. Any reactions to this one?
Yeah, the worst kept secret in free agency, right? We knew this one was coming for a while here. And I think it's interesting. Like, we've talked about Wan'Dale Robinson many times on the show. You go back a couple of years ago, the 93 catch, 699 yard season, right? He only had 3 touchdowns. That was like the definition of your, Mickey Mouse, PPR scam, all that sort of stuff.
Yes.
Last year, we at least saw some bigger games from him. You can argue, the matchups might have been a little easier in some of those games, but he did have 300-yard games and had a more respectable end of the year stat line. 92 catches, went over 1,000 yards, had 4 touchdowns. So became a little more interesting for fantasy. Actually finished the year as the wide receiver 21 in fantasy points per game. I could see something similar now in this environment, because the one thing that he is going to get in Tennessee is volume, right? They need someone to come in. They did not have a true number one receiver, and I don't think he is necessarily a true number one receiver, but he is going to get a ton of volume. He is going to get opportunity there. He has the familiarity with Daboll. I think Cam Ward is a better quarterback than what we saw last year. So I think this offense is going to be a little better, a little more improved. And I think Wan'Dale is not going to be somebody that's going to, like, win you your league by any means. But again, maybe a little bit like the Pittman thing, a guy that I think you're going to draft and get some value on, because I think he's going to finish a little higher than where people are going to take him because of all the times that you've called him that PPR scam. I think the general public perception on him is fairly low, and yet he's going to go to this situation where right now, depending who they draft, he could potentially be the guy in that passing attack, and you have to look at him for fantasy and consider him as somebody that you're going to want to have in your lineup and maybe another career year ahead.
Are you saying this is my fault? Like, I'm bringing down the Wan'Dale Robinson discourse?
I mean, not in a bad way necessarily. If you're creating that value, then I'm all for it. We should do this more often. We should like pick a guy in the offseason and just totally talk him down, get the ADP low, and then go profit.
Unethical behavior
I
by
would never.
Justin Boone here.
I would never.
Yeah, we would never do that. No, but Wan'Dale Robinson, though, I'm with you that I think, look, from a fit standpoint, we can just go ahead and copy paste a lot of what we saw. I think especially last year, if you want to be optimistic for Wan'Dale Robinson, where they essentially took his Mickey Mouse route tree from 2024 and earlier in his career and said, hey, what if we just threw him like a deep post or a deep over every now and again, which, by the way, that's what Wan'Dale Robinson was doing back at Kentucky as a prospect with Liam Cohen back in that offense. Like he was more of it was just everything underneath. Like I said, Mickey Mouse gadgety stuff, and then just rip it deep on a post or a corner route. And Wan'Dale did that last year. That's how he kind of split the difference between his very low average depth of target and then what it was in 2025. I think they'll do that here in this offense. It's a very spread out offense in what I'm imagining it to be with Brian Daboll there in Tennessee. Shotgun heavy. They're, going to get him ripping down the field in that way. And yeah, there's just a huge target vacuum here. And I will say, like, Jackson Dart, he'll let it rip on some of those big in-breaking routes. So will Cam Ward if the pass protection is there. So I agree. Wan'Dale's not going to win you your league or anything, but if you're drafting like in best ball and you're looking for like a cheap, just kind of compiler, I think he can get that done. For me, like when I've given him this contract, I don't know who really cares. Like you may have cut off Chimere Dike's path to development here because I kind of think they should be deployed pre-snap in the same ways. But Tennessee's a blank slate wide receiver room. They're probably not done at wide receiver. I almost would be surprised if they don't make more moves in the NFL draft coming up here. But yeah, worst kept secret in the league was that Wan'Dale Robinson was going to follow Brian Daboll to Tennessee. It is what's happened here.
Yeah, we almost have to, talking about the contracts, like grade them on a bit of a curve. Like we're looking at the money, but the salary cap's gone up so much. Like teams have a lot of money to spend out there. So I think you got to look at it and at least factor that in a little bit, that teams, they have a lot of money in their pocket. It's probably burning a hole, especially when you're one of the weaker teams in the league.
Tennessee
especially. Titans that has, a huge need at that spot too. They had to come away with somebody, and this is the guy they got. And they're probably, struggling a little bit in terms of some of the higher end free agents wanting to go there. They've gotten a few guys, but when you're trying to get those big name free agents, how many guys are looking at Tennessee, right? Not really a contender. So I think we got to factor all that in when we're considering the contracts.
Yeah, like I said, it's fine. It's not bad. It's not, oh my God, what a steal. It's probably fine. You're paying for a little bit of certainty, which if you're Tennessee, I totally don't mind if you're paying for some certainty. We buried the lead here. One of the biggest wide receiver moves of the offseason so far has been Mike Evans leaving Tampa Bay. Jason Light's first ever draft pick all the way back in 2014 for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers has left Tampa Bay. The 32-year-old, he'll be 33 this season. He turns 33 in August, just like your boy, is headed to San Francisco to play with the San Francisco 49ers. Boone, I love this fit. I'm really curious where you think he's going to land in your fantasy rankings, because I would just say from a real-life standpoint, it's a perfect match. Mike Evans is, I think we saw the first signs of decline for him last year, just a little bit, not like going off the cliff. I do think he has the two trump cards you want for an aging receiver. One, he came into the NFL as a true freak athlete. So him as a diminished form of himself is still probably better than most receivers from an athletic standpoint. Plus, he has developed into an elite technician over the years, which I never think he gets enough credit for. So he has that trump card to age pretty well too. Obviously, there's always a risk with 33-year-old receivers. We just don't see that going on very often, especially a guy who's dealt with injuries over the last few years. But elsewhere, like, he is perfectly suited to Kyle Shanahan's X-receiver position. The routes that he lines up best with, I put the route chart of Brandon Ayuk 2023, like where they were using him, to Mike Evans' route tree last year. It perfectly overlaps. So there would have been teams where I thought Evans actually probably would not fit all that well just at this point in his career, like running too many vertical go routes. But those in-breaking routes, like dig routes and stuff over the middle of the field, he's perfectly suited to do that. I think he'll crush it here. I think his addition is good news for Ricky Pearsall to kind of move around the formation as well. So I'm all sunshines and rainbows with this Mike Evans to San Francisco deal. Do you feel differently? Like, where do you think about him from a fantasy standpoint?
No, I think he's certainly a winner going there. And you mentioned it, like the Shanahan offense, basically any time they've asked a receiver to be their top receiver, and they've had to ask a bunch of different guys, even this past season, right? All the injuries, the Ayuk situation, we saw Juwan Jennings have to step up. We saw Pierce have to step up. We even saw like Kendrick Bourne having big games. And we saw DeMarcus Robinson having big games. Like anytime the injuries occurred, no matter who that number one receiver is, they normally do well for fantasy. So to put Mike Evans out there with the talent that he definitely still has, there's still juice left in the tank. I am excited about it. Now I'm docking him in my rankings, and a couple of things you touched on there, right? One is the age. We're going into the age 33 season, which is a little bit scary. And it's especially scary when you think of the durability concerns. I went back, Harmon, and I looked. He's dealt with a hamstring injury 6 straight seasons.
Oh, yeah.
Missed a variety of time, played through it some of the time. But it has been there that long. This is a chronic injury that he has dealt with. There have been other injuries along the way as well, but those things tend to pop up a little more the older you get. And yes, he's transitioned his game. He's a technician, all that sort of stuff, but he's also like a big bodied receiver. And I feel like in general, those guys don't tend to age that well. And sometimes they can completely fall off that cliff. So I'm kind of baking all that in and keeping him down around like wide receiver 30, more of that wide receiver 3 range. Of course, there's upside when he's on the field. He will probably give you wide receiver 2 value. So you're going to have to take that into account. But I'm a little bit worried that the injuries are going to be an issue, and forget all the jokes about the 49ers and all the injuries like that, because he was dealing with this before he got there. So yeah. I think that's a bit of a concern. It also doesn't scare me away from Ricky Pearsall at all, like you mentioned. I think some people looked at this and said, okay, Mike Evans is now there and he's the number 1 and now Pearsall the opportunity. No, Ricky Pearsall can still perform well. They had to go out and get somebody, right? George Kittle is going to be dealing with an injury early in the season. We're not 100% sure when he's going to be back. Ayuk gone, Jennings probably going to be gone. He's in free agency. So we will see what happens here, but bringing in Mike Evans does not immediately kill Ricky Pearsall's value. In fact, I have him in a similar range, slightly below where I have Evans, but in a similar range as like that wide receiver 3 flex option with some upside.
I mean, my God, the amount of substation memes the producers have just thrown in my face during Boone's monologue here. I'm this close to breaking. But you're right. Regardless of whether you believe in this electrical substation conspiracy theories or it's just like, hey, the 49ers maybe have the worst training staff, whatever you want to say, okay? The 49ers have just been, or maybe it's just bad luck. That's also very much part of it too. It's a physical sport, bad luck. They've drafted a lot of guys who've dealt with injuries. Like, regardless, San Francisco players have had bad luck with injuries, and Mike Evans has had bad luck with injuries, if you want to just call it that. So that is without a question a risk. I'll probably come in a little bit higher than that on Mike Evans because I think the path to him being Devontae Adams for the Rams last year is just so easy to say. Like, even if he is a 750, 800-yard receiver, he could still catch 10 to 12 touchdowns because they just go to him over and over again, which will be an interesting conversation about like Christian McCaffrey's touchdown upside. Like, these are things we can parse out over the course of the summer. But, I do agree with you that like there's risk involved here. And for Ricky Pearsall, like they were going to add somebody, and the fact that it is an on-ball vertical receiver, I think it's going to allow Pearsall to slip back into the role that he was originally designed for, how they were using him as a rookie, someone that could move around the formation, not just run those deeper clear out routes. So I think, again, good news for Pearsall, who the team is still very high on, his teammates still believe in. Like, this is somebody I'm still absolutely really willing to invest in this year. The Mike Evans addition, that already should have been baked in, that it was going to be somebody as like a big perimeter receiver who can actually, again, allow Pearsall to move around a little bit more. And just like Evans is going to be a huge upgrade on what Juwan Jennings was for this team last year. So I think it's good for the offense as a whole.
And low-key, a really positive development for Brock Purdy, too. We saw how well he finished the year. And yes, they had an easy schedule and all that sort of stuff. But when I was working on the rankings the last couple months and you thought about all the uncertainty at receiver and you thought about George Kittle's injury, it was very easy to start moving Purdy down kind of into that high-end QB2 range. I think this addition immediately puts him back up into the top 12, into the low-end QB1 ranks, and continues to make him somebody that I think is going to be a target in fantasy drafts.
All right, I want to get to some breaking news that happened just a few minutes ago into the show. Romeo Doubs signed with the New England Patriots. According to Ian Rappaport, it's a 4-year, is it $70 million deal for Romeo Doubs? $80 million deal for Romeo Doubs here. So we're still finding out, obviously, all of these contracts are fake news. Even Mike Evans's deal, it's like really a 1-year, $14 to $16 million deal, even though it's 3 years. Like the money is what it is. It just shows some level of commitment. But I like this move for New England here, Boone. I don't know if it's going to be a fantasy needle mover, but it's a guy that's going to be able to take some outside receiver reps for New England.
It feels like a bit of a consolation prize, though, doesn't it? Like the last 2 years, the Patriots have been in the market to try to get that like true number one guy. Last year, they sort of like came around the back door and ended up getting Stephon Diggs and slow playing it when he was coming off the injury early in the season and got really good production out of him. They missed on Chris Godwin, who they tried to get last year, this year, and maybe they are still in the market for an A.J. Brown. But to me, this kind of looks like they were trying to get one of the top guys, and they kind of had to settle for Romeo Doubs because, again, I don't think he's like a real needle mover for fantasy. He will have some big games. He'll be elevated a bit by playing with Drake May, and yet I still see Doubs as what he was with the Packers, which is that player that's going to go out and score a couple touchdowns one week and then be basically nothing for the next month after that. It's going to be very sporadic in terms of his production. And I don't know that he's that much of an upgrade on what they already had there. Like, it's really disappointing to me that this is all they're coming away with for Drake May.
Yeah, look, I think the draft was always going to be the answer for the Patriots in terms of, I had a Patriots fan tweet me today, like, can you explain the Patriots' obsession with wide receiver threes and their lack of interest in getting an elite wide receiver one? I was like, well, again, I did a whole breakdown for my YouTube channel on this. Like, if you're going into free agency saying we got to get a number one wide receiver, you're going to be disappointed. Those guys don't exist. The only guy who could be an elite number one receiver that's signed in free agency is Mike Evans because he's 33 years old. And by the way, like, I don't think New England, from what they want of their X receiver, would fit Mike Evans in the same way that a Shanahan X receiver route tree would as well. So I don't even know that I would have loved that fit necessarily. So, and again, that's no lock. Evans is 33 years old. He's probably a future Hall of Famer, but like, that's it. Okay, like Alec Pierce is not a number one. Even if he would have been the top receiver on the depth chart, he's not a number one receiver. All these guys are not. Like, again, it's easier to. I'd love to find an elite number one receiver. They're not just growing on trees for you to go pluck them off there. Like, so getting Doubs, who maybe is an acceptable 2 or a really good 3, I think is fine for New England. And I'll be really interested to see if Doubs coming in and playing as the outside on the ball, like traditional X receiver type, does it allow Kayshon Boutte to move around? Like Kyle Williams was kind of pigeonholed as an X receiver last year. We'll see if he can play different roles for this team. I know they're still really excited about Kyle Williams, or at least that's what they've said publicly. So yeah, I think they'll probably add somebody in the NFL draft, maybe late in the first round, maybe on day 2. It's not exciting. It's not sexy, but it's not the worst thing in the world. Unfortunately, like I think the Diggs thing, like they were moving on from him because of the legal issues that he is facing. I think that's a big part of why he's not on the team anymore.
And maybe I'm impacted by being a Bills fan and watching kind of how Buffalo's addressed the receiver position the last couple of years, and this kind of having that same feel of like these underwhelming free agent signings.
Doubs is better than like Josh Palmer or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Like that's like Buffalo was shooting way too low. I hear you. There's scar tissue there, but that's just like a totally different tier to me.
Yeah, agreed. But still, I think they need to find that guy. And yes, it's very difficult to do that. And maybe they'll be able to look to the draft and get somebody there. So they might not be done yet. But for the time being, it just feels underwhelming. And yet still, it's another weapon for Drake May. And this, takes Drake May probably out of that pocket of guys who were, fantasy fallers, because I start to look at it and go, okay, they're not getting him any more help and they're going to lose Diggs. And I'm putting together, winners and losers, risers and fallers right now. And I started to consider Drake May as potentially a guy who could be a faller. I think this at least stops that. I still hope they go and do something else. They got to get more weapons for him. So yes, a little bit underwhelming, a great landing spot for Doubs, could maximize his value. And yet I still question how high his ceiling could be, probably at most as a wide receiver 3 flex option in my mind.
Yeah, I think with any of these free agent deals beyond, obviously Mike Evans, different consideration, but even for like Wan'Dale or Romeo Doubs, you're hoping that that guy can like hold the line for 2 years, and then whoever you've drafted and developed is ready to step up and be like the next version of that in 2 years. That's what you're hoping in an ideal world. That they're not like hoping, okay, this is Drake May's number one receiver for the rest. That's the problem with Buffalo, is that the guys that they wanted, like the young guy that they wanted to step up, obviously did not step up. Hopefully for New England, this goes in a different direction. 3 more wide receiver deals just to group in that I think matter a little bit to varying degrees. Rashid Shaheed returns to Seattle on a 3-year deal. Jahan Dotson, yes, what is dead may never die. He goes to the Atlanta Falcons. One of the lightest wide receiver depth charts in the league, Boone. Just saying. 2-year deal for Jahan Dotson going to Atlanta.
Did I not text you when he signed? I texted you immediately.
Listen,
all the dynasty shares I had Dotson. We still both believe, like, it's been a while. There were flashes during that rookie season. There was 7 touchdowns during that rookie season. We get to still say that he was a former first-round pick, all that sort of stuff as you try to hold on to hope. But yeah, the main thing here is that he'll have an opportunity with the Falcons. Whether it will turn into anything, it's still a long shot. We're talking about more of a dynasty stash. And yet the window is like just slightly open for him to potentially come through and do something in Atlanta. You know, not necessarily maybe what Darnell Mooney did there a couple years ago, but you could see him become that number 2 pass catcher in the offense, that number 2 receiver. Maybe, but it's still definitely a long shot. Rashid Shaheed, I think there's more of a ceiling for Shaheed than what we saw last year. And yes, he made an impact on that offense. He made an impact on that team, especially on special teams in the Super Bowl run. But I keep coming back to, like, what was he doing in the first half of the year when he was with the Saints? Wide receiver 21 in fantasy points per game through 5 weeks in 2024. Posted 6 top 20 receiver finishes in 2023. And then last year, before he got dealt, he was like a wide receiver 3 flex option, completely boomer bust guy, but let's give him a full offseason here to get comfortable there. Maybe they work him into the offense more. I think there is potentially something there, and it makes me very sad for my guy or our guy, Torrey Horton. I had high hopes for him. I still hope he can come through, but bringing back Shaheed, you know, maybe makes that a little less exciting.
Yeah, that maybe makes that like a year 3, year 4, if it ever happens type of thing for Torrey Horton, which is just tough. I mean, that's what's going to happen when you fall in the draft because of injury concerns and then you get hurt in your rookie year. Like it makes it tough for like, hey, we're just going to walk into the year with Torrey Horton as our number 2 or number 3 receiver. We'll see. Also interested to see if Shaheed can just play more than Cooper Kupp this year, because that did not happen down the stretch of last season. And like you said, it's just tough. Like the history of receivers changing teams in the middle of the season, it's not all that great. That's why like what Jacoby Myers did for the Jags was so huge, right? Like that's a pretty big one. So again, definitely just hoping to see more from Shaheed, but we shall see. On the other end of it too, just the last one of like just wide receiver deals that I think are interesting. Jalen Nailor going to the Raiders on a 3-year deal. Nailor is a guy that I charted like right at like Sunday night. So, like, thank God he ended up being signed on the first day of free agency. He has some interesting pieces to him, Boone. He wins on outbreaking routes. He was really good at the catch point last year, can block and play all 3 receiver positions. So that's a nice add for a Raiders team that's kind of starting over at wide receiver. Don't know if it's going to be a fantasy factor, but we're interested in who's going to be lining up at wide receiver for the Raiders, just because Fernando Mendoza, number 1 overall pick, Clint Kubiak, new play caller there. So I'm with you. I think all 3 of these guys will make impacts. We just have to see how much of a role they hold, but I'm glad that you were with me, that we can have a little candle still lit for Jahan Dotson. You brought up Darnell Mooney. Like, nobody expected Darnell Mooney to be good for that Falcons team across from Drake London, and then he had a really nice season in his first year there. So maybe there's just some hope for Jahan Dotson. Boone didn't discourage me. He allowed me to have the moment here, which is all that matters.
Well, and I have seen him dropped in many dynasty leagues, and I've picked him up on those waiver wires and placed him on my bench for exactly this moment. So we are hoping, Harmon.